All right, so in the last episode, we made some adjustments to our mobile version of HorrorVerse. I'll show you that here. On mobile, in your watch list, you can now filter by all these different watch list options, which is kind of tight. It looks cool. The problem is we didn't make any improvements to the desktop version of this app. So it still has this pretty ugly version of the services menu and then this random UI confused streaming only button. So in today's episode, we're going to actually use Cursor AI and make some improvements to this page. And long term, in the next episode, we're going to work on bringing in all the ratings into one page so there's a more cohesive experience for the user. So let's start here. So on our watch list on mobile, we have a pretty good setup here where we're, at least the menu, the watch list options gives us all of these different things. We can sort it and we can filter it by platform. I'd like to make some improvements to the desktop so that instead of a weird service streaming only option, we have a little more something that seems more normal. So here's what I'm thinking. We'll add a toggle between availability of the movie, if it's streaming, if it's in theaters, if it's anywhere that you want to watch it. And then depending on if we set it to streaming, at that point we will allow the user to filter by platform. It'll be a little bit different than mobile, but we're getting there. We're getting to a more comprehensive solution. So let's start here. So like always, I like to prepare Composer in Cursor with some context around what we're doing. So press Control I on Windows to get Composer open here, and I'm going to figure out where we are in the world. I don't even remember what the name of these are. So I'll inspect this, open up our tools. We can see that this item here, this poster, is being displayed by a class called user list item poster. So I'll copy that. I'll head back over to Cursor. I just want to figure out where we are in the app. And it looks like that class is used in a few different places: general movie collection, user list, feature keyword, desktop user list. I'm pretty sure that's it. That sounds like what it was. Now some of these naming conventions have changed over time because we make changes to the app. Some of them are more structural in nature, and the naming doesn't always get refactored in the process. So if I look here, desktop user list, if I pull up where this comes up in the app, you can see it's rendered inside of this user list component, which is also where we render the mobile user list. In the last episode, you can watch that here, we updated a lot of things on the mobile user list, and now we're going to focus on the desktop user list. So now that we know where we are, let's prepare Cursor. So we can see that when I'm looking at this component, we have two style sheets, user list and user lists. That's not confusing, as well as this component. So I'm going to say this: please review the component user desktop user list and the associated style sheets user list.css and user lists.css for the way data is moved around the application and the conventions used for styling items in the style sheets. Then make the following improvements. So in Cursor, we can declare in this Composer view if we want to use normal or agent. Now, agent is a relatively new improvement to Cursor where the AI is a lot more agentic. It thinks a lot more, it makes more steps at once, and that's great, and I think we're going there. My experience with it has been that it does more and it makes more mistakes, so there's a lot more to backtrack. It can be done carefully. I haven't figured out the greatest way to do that. If you have ideas or if you've used it, kind of let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear how agent is being used effectively. We're going to stick with normal for now, and this is a typical prompt structure that I use. I say, look at this, review this, get a good understanding of it, and then we're going to make some improvements on top of it. So it doesn't make assumptions about what style sheets or what routing or what variables are being used. It actually studies it first and it has a good understanding. This is kind of like if you're familiarizing yourself with the code base, that's a good practice too. Take a look at what everything is doing before you start getting your hands dirty, making assumptions that it was written a certain way. So now that we have our prompt set up, please review the component. We want to make the following changes. The first change we're going to make, if we flip back over here, first change we want to make is that we want to add a row here. We're going to add a row that toggles it between streaming only and all titles. Very simple. And we're going to use that to key off of, meaning if the user has selected streaming only, we will then give them the filter menu. We will then give them the filter menu. We'll have to add a sort menu as well, but we're going to wait to do that. So first, make the following choice. Add a modern looking toggle menu in the same row as we're going to leave all the stuff that's there, and we'll pull it out as we move the functionality around. So I want to figure out where we are. Looks like we have a row here. If I make this a little smaller, I can show you. In our dev tools, it will highlight the element on the page. This desktop user list filter container, and then there's a nav menu. We're inside of this one right here, desktop user filter container. And I'm just going to double check that it's in this component somewhere, and look at that. I Control F, search for it, there it is. So in the same row as inside the element, add a modern looking toggle menu with 2 options. Streaming only and all movies. All formats, all availability. We'll just kind of leave it here. We'll refine it as we come up with a better idea as we go. Okay, we're going to give it a little more information around this toggle menu. What do we want it to look like? The toggle menu should highlight the selected option with a rounded gray container, and the other option should not have any background. All right, and then we'll start there. Let's get the appearance right, and then we'll build the functionality on top of it. You could go both ways. We could build the functionality and then build something to dress it up with, but we're going to start here. Make sure it kind of looks like what we're expecting, and then we'll go from there. So Cursor is now taking our prompt, and it's building out inside of the style sheets that we already declared, inside of the component that we told it, it's building all this stuff. So it gives us a little information about what it's doing. Let's take a look at the code. So it's going to remove a handle streaming now change, which is the toggle button that we have. It actually looks like it's keeping it. It's going to set to stream now. Okay, and it's actually building on top of our existing feature. So even though I said we'll build next to it and then remove, it is thinking it's smart enough, and maybe it is, to build right on top of it and adjust how we're handling it. So format toggle container, I think that's a new class. Let's take a peek. Format toggle container, yep, display flex, line items center. So the centers of them are aligned, background color, border radius. Okay, it looks like it has figured out what it wants it to look like. We'll accept all and see what so our client is compiling again. And in a second, we should see it update right here. There we go. So look at that. It actually is kind of like what I was thinking we'd see. So, and it jumped ahead of us and added the functionality, which is tight. But let's move this to be on the front, the first item in this list, because we're going to move this filter item and conditionally render it on the right side of the row. So we have one row where you control everything. The main item here, stylistically, is the toggle. So we just added this toggle. We can find it. We can find it here. Format toggle container. This div, if I collapse that, is next to this other div. Do I have that right? Yeah. User list filter. The whole filter is inside this from rows 217 to 251. That includes all of that stuff. That's this entire drop-down menu. It's all rendered inside of one component. Now that could be abstracted into another component. We're going to leave it for now because it's just kind of what we have. So we'll take our user list filter 217. I'm just going to Control X to cut that, and then I'll paste it on the other side. And based on our styles, we shouldn't see any differences except that we're just rearranging these things. So if I save that, look at that. Beautiful. Now, we can adjust the row here. If I take this entire row, desktop user list filter container, And you can see that it's just kind of building out a row sequentially. What I want to do is split the row in two. I want to put half of the items on the left, half of the items on the right. And it looks like we have, yeah, that sounds great. I'm going to preview it without making any actual changes just by editing it with our developer tools by adding justify content space between. And we can see how that moves that over there. So that's the change we want to make to this specific class. So let's grab that class here, Control F, Control V, desktop user list filter container. There's only one, and this is exactly what we were editing in the DevTools space between. Okay, I save that. That leaves us here. So cool. Now this service button appearance looks a lot like the toggle here, and I think that's okay for now. We'll kind of leave that. Maybe we'll make it a square later, but you can see when I click on it that positionally it's moving, it's flying out the menu left aligned with its own button, and that's fine, except that if we have a smaller window like this, if I make this smaller, you can see now we have an overflow issue. Well, we don't right now because I clicked out of it, but we can see that it overflows to the right. I don't want that. And we know this filter button is only going to render on desktop, and we have moved it permanently to the right side of the screen. Well, permanently for now. So temporarily, permanently, whatever you want to call that. So instead of left aligning it, let's have it fly out so that it's available on the right side of everything. So that menu, remember, it's inside of that whole div. It's all written right into the one thing, but it's the filter drop-down menu. And I'm going to edit it in Developer Tools here to see if we can get it to appear the way that we want before we make the actual change in the CSS style sheet. So filter drop-down menu is positioned absolutely, which means that its parent container must be a relative container. Yep, desktop user list filter is relative. So absolute is going to, everything we tell it is going to be positioned compared to where the relative container is that it's inside of, the first one it finds. Absolutely, top is 100% down, left is aligned at 0, and that's, we can either change left to 100% or we can change this to right. And that'll now place it directly underneath our item. So that's literally the only change we have to make there. Now, I don't like the appearance. It looks so old Windows style, right? With the big scroll bar, and when you scroll, you lose sight of the clear all, select all. We're not going to worry about that right now. We're going to worry more about the function. So I'll search for that class, filter drop-down menu. Here's the change we just made, left 0, now right 0. All right, what else do we want to change here? Well, we don't want this menu to show up at all if the user has selected all formats. And only because all formats implies it's not necessarily streaming. If we say streaming only, then we'll assume that the user is looking to figure out where they can stream it if they don't want to just hover their mouse over the top. And at that point, we'll present them with that option, and we'll change this from service to streaming platform or something like that. So let's conditionally render it. Let's start with the conditional rendering. So this is the filter drop-down user list. Nope, it's the desktop user list filter. Wow, that's a mouthful. And that's right here. This, am I right here? Am I right? Desktop user list filter, desktop, this is the, okay, there's the toggle container. That always shows up. Desktop user list filter only sometimes shows up. And it only shows up when we have this is streaming now. Remember, when we toggle, we're changing a state variable, and that state variable is called is streaming now. Let me show you where that's defined initially. Right here, is streaming now, set is streaming now, use state false, set to false. Well, we only want to render that one when that state variable is set to true. When they say it is streaming now, that's when we want to present them with that option. So I'm going to take this entire filter block and I'm going to place it inside of that state variable if it's defined as true. So is streaming now, I could say equals 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 true, or by placing it here, we're saying is it truthy, meaning is it going to render as something that shows up as truthy. And so if I do 2 ampersands, that will say, hey, when this renders true, why don't you just show us this desktop user filter? We love that. So let me hit save on that. And now service is here. When I click all formats, it's gone. Service, gone. And service, we already know, we've already built a lot of logic in here. This is not the same as our mobile version of that menu, which is fine. But I'm going to change the language of it, and we're going to call that a complete story. We've adjusted a little bit of how this experience works in a more positive way to very clearly show what the items are. Now, all formats, I'm not too jazzed about that language yet, but we'll live with it for now. So service is the word used here, and that's just a string here. We'll call this streaming platform. We could say filter. We could say, ooh, I don't like that. Don't like that one bit. Let's say filter for now. A little less specific, but since contextually it's only showing up here when we click streaming only, maybe that makes sense. Filter by, let's say filter by. Okay, and it doesn't wrap and get weird. So as we get smaller, we'll see that eventually we'll hit our breakpoint here, and we're now in the desktop mode. And you can see, because of where the logic is hosted, we have our oh, never mind, that's not true at all. Just totally lying to you. Okay, we'll call that good. That's going to complete this story. In the next episode, we're going to work on bringing in all of these ratings and stuff into one cohesive experience of this page. So stay tuned. That video will be out soon. If you learn anything, have any questions, let me know in the comments. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next episode. Bye-bye.